Welcome, everybody. We'd like to go ahead and start right out because we only have 45 minutes and this is a very important topic and we want to make sure that there's plenty of time for discussion. Most people my age wear glasses to read. I have to wear glasses to see anything past what I'm reading. So I want to welcome you all and thank you for coming to this presentation. A couple of things that struck me during the morning plenary today from Dr. Armour. It was such a fantastic introduction. Of course, her entire purpose was introducing us to this 45-minute program. But I was struck by, again, the thought that gender diversity is something that we need to work for, not only because it's right in itself, but also because there really is a business case for it. The slides that Dr. Armour showed that showed the impacts of gender diversity in leadership on return on investment and return on sales really caught my attention. I think if you ever have been in a situation where you've had a male CEO roll his eyes at the suggestion that gender diversity matters to the bottom line, I would recommend having a copy of that slide handy so you can whip it out and show it to him in the future. I was also struck by Dr. Armour's observation that the more tolerant we are in our organizations of diversity, the more likely we are to hear what's actually being said rather than just what we expect to hear. And also her point that diverse groups have less of a tendency towards groupthink. As a librarian and as someone who believes that groupthink is one of the gravest threats to my profession right now, I found that argument especially compelling. Both of these points, again, suggest that gender diversity in leadership in the world of scholarly communications is not just about social justice. It's also about improving scholarship and improving scholarly communication. And this brings us to our panel today. A recent study that was done by two of our panelists, Lauren Kane and Alice Meadows, found, among other interesting things, that there's roughly a 2 to 3 ratio of women to men in scholarly publishing, but a 3 to 1 ratio of men to women in CEO positions, and a 4 to 1 ratio of men to women on board chairs. And even more interestingly, I think, there's a 3 to 1 ratio of men to women in speaking slots at industry events, and a 2 to 1 ratio of men to women in keynote speaking slots. And I'll let the panelists discuss these findings and their implications further. Let me very briefly introduce our panelists, and then they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves as they respond to the questions that we've prepared for them. We have with us Emma Brink from Wiley, Nigel Clear from Elsevier, Lauren Kane from BioOne and a co-organizer of the session, Laura Ritchie from EBSCO, and Alice Meadows from Wiley. From Orchid, formerly of Wiley, currently of Orchid. So let's jump right into the first question, and this one is going to be fielded mainly by Emma and Laura. The question is, what is our own personal perspective on the gender gap, especially in early career versus senior level positions, and why do we see that gap? What are we doing personally to affect change, and what outcomes are we seeking? Emma, Laura?
Sure, I'll start. So as Rick said, my name is Emma Brink, and I am an assistant editor at Wiley, and I've been there for about 4 years. I started as an intern and have slowly worked my way up, and I manage a few journals there. I started getting involved in SSP about 2 years ago, and one thing that really strikes me is that up until this year, all of the Emerging Leader Award winners were women, and most of the Early Career Grant Award winners were women. My year was all women. So we know that there is lots of leadership potential in young women in this industry, but something is happening that prevents them from moving forward, and I think that's what we're going to be discussing. What I will say about my personal experience and how I've managed this in my career, I don't really feel yet that it's gender diversity has been a barrier to me in my career, but I see how it has been for women at my company and women who are in more leadership positions who are trying to move higher. And I want to be able to look up to those women. I want to be able to emulate them. And I want to say I can be on a board someday. I can be a CEO someday. But if I don't see that happening at my company, then I won't feel like I can do that. What I think about promotions and moving up and getting there, it's hard because I'm an ambitious young lady. I think a lot of us were or are. And I never want to appear ungrateful for what I've been given. And I don't want to appear pushy. And I don't think that these are things that my male colleagues worry about. But I do all the time, and I really shouldn't. So what I've started to do to navigate this is just to ask for everything I want. And usually I get it. I have female bosses, so that helps. But they are very open and receptive to this, and that's how I've managed it so far.
Hello. Is it on? So I am going to echo many of the same points as Emma. My name's Laura Ricci. I work at EBSCO. I'm a senior product manager of partnerships. I've been in the industry only about 10 years, so I'm still in that mid-early career range. And thinking about this panel, I thought I would start with a story about when I was home in October visiting my family in Detroit. My mom and my dad started telling stories about when my mom was in her early career. So I learned that when she was 22, 23, she was a chemist at GM, and she was the only female in her 400, 500 person chemists union. So she would go to these union meetings, and the room would be full of men, and she would be sitting in the back, and the union leader would be up front and blah, 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 and complaining about something and yelling, and then he would swear, and he would go, "And sorry, Alice." And my mom would just be like, "It's okay, Bob," but every single time. And so, this is what she was dealing with as a young woman herself. Now, the amazing thing about this story is that I'm in my 30s and I had never heard it before. So I looked at my mom and I was, "Why not? This is such an inspiring story, Mom. Like how and what she told me was, "Well, you're fine. You're doing what you want, and that's important." And so what struck me about her coaching is that she cared about the attitude that her daughters had and not necessarily worrying about what limits are in my way. She just wanted us to go for it. And now as I'm advancing in my career and I'm being asked to take on more leadership and mentorship roles, I'm looking around and I'm seeing that that kind of perspective isn't something that I can take for granted in other women that I'm being asked to lead. And so that's why I'm very glad to have conversations like this at places like SSP, where we can have these conversations, we can get this discussion out in the open. And because frankly, even if I personally advance as far as I possibly can in my career, and I'm sitting on a board somewhere or in a CEO role and everyone below me is a man, I'm not even 1 percentage point. So it's really about advancing every young woman and coaching them and mentoring them. That what makes this conversation important.
Great. Any other quick comments on this question before we move on to the second one?
I'm Lauren Kane. I'm the COO for BioOne. And it's been interesting getting involved in this topic and working with Alice on the article that was published and doing these Mind the Gap sessions, because I've had a number of people come up to me after and say things which I think are meant to be complimentary, like, "Well, look at you, you're doing great, COO." Basically what I think they're saying is, what do you have to complain about? But I always think it's interesting that people think that a career is something that just happens to you. As I think Emma pointed out, I have been meticulous in asking for things, for advocating for myself, for planning, for doing things that I think many of us do, but perhaps some of us don't have to. And so I think that's kind of my angle in coming at this issue is, as you said, not being ashamed when you need to do those things, when you need to be proactive about your career, but also kind of thinking about the biases that make that necessary.
Excellent, thanks. So our next question is, what about our organizations? Why should our organizations care about the gender gap between the bottom and the top, and what can or should they be doing to address it? And we're going to invite Nigel to kick off the discussion of this question.
Thanks, Rick. So, yeah, my name's Nigel. I'm a man. This has been a really interesting... Thank you. it's been a great group to work with. We met virtually before we got together, and this whole question of what could we or should we be doing, I think it's quite complex. And I think there's three broad areas. Why should we consider the question of gender equality? And we heard some really cool stuff earlier from Dr. Armour's presentation about the benefits. But actually, I think the most important thing, reason number one, actually it's the right thing to do. Yeah, I mean, that's, if we start with that as the premise. And what we also heard was when you do the right thing, when you start to engender, excuse the pun, these sorts of these cultures within an organisation, you see other unintended benefits to the organisation. And I'll give you an example that's not publishing related. So my wife works in the oil and gas industry. You can imagine it's a very male-dominated industry. Their number one value in the organisation isn't about creativity or isn't about innovation. It's actually safety. Safety is the number one value. And this manifested itself on the first day that she went to work, where she was walking along, carrying a phone and carrying a laptop and walking up a flight of stairs. She was immediately stopped by somebody saying, hang on, no, you can't do that. You actually have to hold the handrail. And I thought, well, this is a ridiculous thing. This is utterly crazy. But actually, the effect of that is they've engendered an extremely nurturing, caring environment within the organisation. And so things that you can set out as objectives, if they're the right objectives for the right reasons, have other benefits. Then I started to look at things a little bit closer to the Elsevier perspective, I guess. And my role is the director of Elsevier conferences. And I thought I need to measure what we're doing. And the first thing we have to do when we look at these sorts of subjects is be able to measure what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. So I've got one of the few parts of the business where I actually can measure the gender split of our customers. And I went and looked at 60,000 records of our delegates and patted myself on the back when I saw a 60-40 split, perfectly representing the STEM area. And I thought that was great for 2 seconds. I then measured the invited speakers. And actually, the stats you mentioned, Rick, I wish we had those stats. We have 85% invited male speakers at our scientific conferences. Now, this is the one area where we can affect a change. They're invited speakers, for heaven's sake. And this is compounded even worse when I look at the split that we have amongst chairs. Actually, the split's not too bad. We have about a 65 to 35 split men to women on chairs. So it seems that even though we have an opportunity to change things, we're not doing it. And we've got to ask ourselves this question: what are we missing? What are we missing by not including this right gender split? There's a lot of research that will show that women will typically understate their expertise, and us men will always overstate our expertise in a given field. Case in point, 5 months ago I joined the gender working group in Elsevier, and here I am, some sort of expert talking about it. But we have a position, an exalted position that we occupy, and we have a duty here to change things. And I don't think we should try and reflect the status quo. We talk about this 60-40 split as if it's somehow sacrosanct. It's not 60-40, not the further up the chain you go, absolutely not. And if we were just to try and reflect the status quo, we'll maintain the status quo. So we've taken some very, very simple steps within the organisation, and it doesn't have to be difficult. We've changed all of our chair guidelines. Number one in there, please consider the question of gender split when putting together your invited speakers. Ask the question. Do you know what the first response we had was from an engineering conference who said, we've just had a chair drop out, I'm going to try and find a co-chair who's female. It's really, really easy to start doing things, but you've got to have the will to do so. And the difficulty within an organisation is the time it takes for things to happen. There's a report by McKinsey's of last year that showed on average, from the time that an idea is taken on board at the very senior level to it becoming part of a company culture is about 8 years. So we have to start doing things. We have to do it now. And we can do this. As I say, we have great data within Elsevier. That's what we run on. We can affect a change. We will affect a change. That has to be not just from our customer group, but also within our organisation. We've just achieved the EDGE certification. I'm not going to be a salesman for Elsevier, by the way, but allow me just this one indulgence. EDGE is economic development through gender equality. And we've only achieved that very bottom level, which is called the EDGE Assess, which basically means we've made a commitment. We've made a very, very public commitment that we will look at the areas of equality in pay, we will look at the areas of flexible working and empowerment. And this is a subject quite close to my heart. 20 years ago, I was widowed with 2 very young children. And trying to balance this notion of going to work and providing with childcare 20-odd years ago was really, really difficult. So within my organisation, my part of Elsevier, and let's be honest, it's typically, as anyone who's been to a conference will know, most conference organisers are indeed female, which means that most conference organisers at some point will need to take a career break. And we have to be a bit careful whereby we're so scared of legislation, we don't ask questions. And if we leave things to legislation, actually, what companies will do is the bare minimum to achieve that legislation. What I'm more interested in doing is saying to myself, look, you're probably going to want a career break at some point. Let us know. How can we support you in that? We have extremely flexible working hours. We don't want to lose that expertise. You know, the UK environment's pretty good, I think, for maternity leave. But we need to make people feel that they can take that and they can come back to work in a flexible way that suits home and work balance. And I guess I'm probably speaking longer than I ought at this point, Rick.
No,
But
please.
I'll carry on if you like.
We've got a few more minutes. Would anybody else like to respond to that? Yeah. Because you're the outgoing president. Otherwise we'd make you wait for the Q&A. But
I was curious, is that career break offered to men as well?
Yeah, the career break is offered to men as well. But here's the thing, do men take it? And that's the difference.
Just to chip in there, so
He's with me.
I have a shirt, you know.
Thank God.
So I work for a mission-driven organisation, and actually they don't offer a career break. You get 2 weeks, and I actually fundamentally think that's wrong.
as speaking as a dad, when each of my 3 kids was born, I was able to take sick time for a little while because I could argue that my wife needs help at home, but there was certainly no paternity. Now my kids are grown, and this was a long time ago. I'm sure everything's different now. Others, Alice, you're looking at me expectantly.
I just want to say a few words about the organisation thing. I work now for Orchid, which is a small non-profit mission-driven organisation, but my former job, as Rick mentioned, was at Wiley, so a very different kind of organisation. And I think one of the things that's really important for our organisations to do is to recognise and confront our individual and collective unconscious bias. And this is something, I'm not sure whether Terry Talline's in the room or not, but she and I at Wiley really tried to hammer this home to the senior leadership, because I think it is something that we're all guilty of, but once you've seen that there's an issue, you can't unsee it, and then you can start addressing it. But a lot of the time, people genuinely don't see it. I think, Nigel, when we spoke, you had a great example. Was it you? No, I think it was your colleague, Holly, had a great example of talking to an HR director who said, well, we've got plenty of women on our leadership team, and she challenged him to say, actually, you sure that's the case? And he came back and said, no, you're right. I literally hadn't seen that it's not, that split isn't there. And at Orchid, we're lucky we have a female executive director, and she's very conscious of this. Our leadership team, we have 4 women and 3 men, and she's very conscious that we need to embrace diversity of all sorts in our organisation. But I don't think that's the case. I think that many organisations pay lip service to this, and I think they probably believe that they are doing something about it, but actually, until you really acknowledge that you have this unconscious bias and you're willing to address it, nothing is really going to change.
We have a couple more minutes for any other comments on this question. Okay, great. We'll move on to the third question, and then we'll have, that should leave us time for plenty of Q&A from the audience. So the third question, so we've talked about our institutions and our home organizations, but what about our institutional organizations? What changes do we want to see? And did I say institutional? I meant professional. Our professional organizations, our larger organizations like SSP. What changes do we want to see in those kinds of organizations, and what role can and should industry organizations play? So, for example, could SSP's code of conduct be adopted industry-wide? Should industry organizations accept our challenge to develop standards for increased diversity at conferences? Alice and Lauren are going to kick off discussion of this question.
So my feeling is that industry organizations exist for the benefit of their members. And as was pointed out at the beginning, this is an industry that is majority female, about 60% women. So I think it is a reasonable expectation that our industry organizations are ensuring that there is an equitable split of voices being heard at conferences, not just in terms of attendance, but being up on the main stage, having an equal representation of keynotes, avoiding things like all-male panels. And this is something that doesn't happen by accident. So the research that Alice and I did last year that was published in Learn Publishing in April looked at 7 conferences that were held in 2015, and we examined the gender distribution of speaking opportunities, as well as keynotes and the prevalence of all-male or single-sex panels. And what we found is that of that group of 7, only 2, and SSP was one of them to their benefit, had an equitable split. And so we talked to SSP, we talked to Melanie Dolchek, who was the program committee co-chair at that time, and she said that absolutely, it doesn't happen by accident, that was something that they were very strategic about, making sure that the committee knew that this was a priority to have gender diversity, and that if a panel was suggested that was all single sex, that they would go back to them and say, no, are there alternatives that can be provided? So again, like what we want to see in terms of the greater leadership divide, this is not something that is just going to automatically repair itself. We have to take corrective action. So my personal feeling is that SSP and other industry organizations really do need to take steps to say, we're not going to support this type of environment, and we need to have some sort of accreditation process or some sort of, as Rick said, stamp of approval for different conferences or different industry events that are going to support that equitable split.
I would totally echo what Lauren said. I think I'd actually be interested, I'm putting you on the spot, Rick, in your view from an SSP perspective, because I know SSP is an organisation that doesn't sort of lobby. It's not a political organisation. But my feeling is that this is an area which is not a sort of an advocacy thing in a traditional sense. So this is actually an area where I believe an organisation like SSP could show real leadership. There's a number of industry organisations out there, some certainly from a conference perspective that are better than others in terms of sort of gender, addressing the gender disparity issue. But I think the fact that this is an industry issue in terms of making sure that our industry is as strong and competitive as possible by hiring and promoting and retaining the right people, irrespective of whether they are men or women, makes it an issue for our industry organisations, as well as Nigel and I think all of us feel that it is also, there's a kind of a moral element to this as well, in that, I'm sure everybody in this room and hopefully everybody in the organisation believes that gender equality is the right thing to do and is achievable, should be achievable if we set ourselves clear goals and then work towards them. So I'm hoping, and I will give you warning that as a newly elected SSP board member, I am intending to raise this issue. But I really do genuinely hope that this is something that maybe SSP can be an industry leader in, and I think the code of conduct that was prepared for this conference and going forward is a really good example of something that could and should be adopted more widely across our industry.
Yeah, and you've hit on a really important point, which is, of course, that we are by design not an advocacy organization. However, there is no reason why we can't set a good example and in fact be a shining example among industry organizations, and I think it's safe to say that it's our intention to do that in every way that we can. Anne?
Just to add on to that too, so not being an advocacy organization is something we talked about at the board meeting, and I think we should challenge ourselves on, is more about we're not for open access or against open access, we're not this, we're not that, but to advocate for the people that populate our industry
Right.
in an across-the-board fashion doesn't seem to me to compromise our ability not to take a political position. I mean,
Right.
This is just about who our members are and supporting our membership. So I don't necessarily see that, although it's dangerously close, as crossing the line of advocacy.
Yeah, my understanding is we have to be careful about that for tax reasons and yada yada yada. But I think you're right that we should know where that line is and approach it.
And certainly come up with things like best practice and
Right.
of that nature.
Right, which we can do without any danger at all.
I would just say thank you, Anne, for that comment, because I think you are spot on that we need to stop thinking about this as a women's issue or a feminist thing.
Right.
This is an industry issue. And so this is not taking some sort of moral high ground. This is a business case for development.
Any other comments on this question from the panelists before we slip into Q&A? Yeah.
I think just to expand on that point, what are we missing? If I look at it from a conference point of view, and we majored a little bit on this, what are we missing in our content if we don't address this issue? And the business outcomes was something I purposely avoided, because I think if we try and win this through data, it's not a particularly necessarily an interesting discussion. But from my point of view, when I see an 85 to 15% split, when I see a panel of male, pale, and stale speakers that we've all seen, I think, you know, we're not.
Hey.
Says the 50-year-old white man. Yeah, I understand this, but you know, I feel as a conference organizer, I feel I can speak on this with some authority. You know, going back to the point made earlier, was that the overstatement of expertise by men versus the understatement to women means that we are missing some really great content from our conferences. And, you know, my job is to make the conference business in Elsevier grow and be better. So the business case, I think, is very, very clear from our point of view.
So I would say, as the co-chair of this conference, we kind of have the luxury in this situation where we have an open call for papers. And so we had over 100 submissions this year. And I think the fact that we have, in my opinion, a fairly diverse spectrum of speakers across all of these panels has been because we have a lot of women in our industry who feel comfortable bringing up opinions and stating issues and organizing panels, and that's great. I think as far as the question of what SSP can do and what organizations like ours can do, I think it's sort of a bi-directional thing, because SSP is a professional organization, but we're all also professionals, and we all belong to, you know, our day jobs, who pay us and who pay for us to be here in many cases. And so, you know, I think the fact that there is an organization like SSP who can make things like training available. In her keynote this morning, Dr. Armour mentioned the training and the leadership coaching that is provided to young women and the difference that that makes. I think, personally speaking, that would make a huge difference to young women who don't always have a safe space to be taught that, yes, you can ask for what you want, and yes, you know, this is how you would do it, and to make them feel empowered to, you know, as many of us had said, yes, we're totally comfortable doing this. Again, I think it's about creating that safe space and for organizations to sponsor their young women to attend and make them feel like this is something that we actually want you to pursue.
Any other thoughts from the panel? All right, this takes us right into our last 15 minutes. So we encourage any questions or comments. And I'm not sure, is this program being recorded? Do we know? If it is, then I'm going to encourage people to go to the mic if they can, because otherwise, although their comments might be audible in the room, they won't make it onto the recording. So, Carol Ann, do you mind? Or do you want to just yell? Yeah.
Take one of their mics.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
But then I'll never give it back.
All right, so I'm Carol Meyer, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about the advocacy issue in terms of SSP.
Yeah.
So I believe very strongly in gender equity. I believe very strongly in equal family leave. I think that our industry, you know, has a long way to go through a lot of things. I would stop short of saying that SSP should lobby for government regulations or rules or anything for something like that. I think that's where the advocacy line is drawn.
Okay.
What I would strongly support, and what I'm so thrilled about, almost to tears, is this kind of conversation. And in the plenary, you know, showing data about how this is real. This isn't just somebody's perception. That gender equity actually improves outcomes for companies and boards, that women actually do encounter bias. And I think a lot of people think it's just complaining, people who don't know the data. And so I'm just thrilled that SSP has the, well, first of all, that the program committee recognized this was an important issue, but in an ongoing capacity, what we can really do is educate people. And you know, through the mentorship program or through the conference programs mostly, to make sure that the actual knowledge that's out there, that's been studied, that's peer-reviewed, and that, you know, is real, is available to everybody in our community. So that's where I think our role is, not so much advocacy, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Hopefully pass the baton.
Charlotte McNaughton, American Society of Civil Engineers. I, of course, am delighted to see that gender equity is being addressed by this organization and by some other professional organizations like CSE. I don't know whether similar research has been done on racial issues, but one of the things that is constantly criticized in the feminist community is that it's all about white women and what white women need. And I don't know what percentages we may be dealing with, not only women in this case, but also minority men. And whether those opportunities are really being looked at as well. I know it's a little tricky because when you look at somebody's name, you may not know, you may be able to make a pretty good guess whether it's male or female, but we're not probably collecting a lot of information on race and that kind of thing. I suspect in an organization like this, it's a matter of allowing yourself to get to know people who are different from you, different countries, different backgrounds, and then trying to find ways to get them involved or encourage them to be involved. I'm not trying to solve this problem really, but I am really trying to push hard that it is another aspect that we can't just do one thing and then congratulate ourselves that we're done, because there's a lot more out there that we need to consider. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, Alice, would you like to respond to that? Oh. Yeah. We've got another mic up here.
So I did just want to respond to that because I completely agree, and we talked, so certainly Lauren and I can't remember whether all of us talked about it, but Lauren and I have had a number of discussions about exactly that issue, and I think our feeling is that absolutely other forms of diversity are a big issue in our industry, but they're a different issue because, at least as far as we can tell, the big issue is attracting people of colour and other types of diversity into the industry in the first place, because I think pretty much anywhere you look, there are there's not the diversity there that you would expect in organisations like this, whereas women are overrepresented in our industry and yet still underrepresented at the top. So it's part of the same challenge, but it's different, and the gender part of it seemed to us one that we could address more readily given who we are and where we are in the industry. So it's not that that's not an issue, and I completely agree it needs to be addressed, but I think it's a separate issue that's going to need some separate initiatives to tackle.
Thank you. Beth Foy Sheridan. I'll just say thank you. This is hugely important, not just this industry, across the globe. So it's great that you are all a panel and discussing these things and making something happen. So thank you for that. I would just like to say that I really hear and appreciate the asking for what you want and for what you need to grow. I have had challenges with that myself personally. I am a strong employee. I know I am. I know I'm valued. When I go into a company, I try to make myself needed. I do not want to be expendable. It doesn't matter what situation I'm in. But I also struggle with the, well, I don't want to offend anyone, and I don't want to be turned down, and it's that constant struggle. And I've had many bosses over the years, both in this industry and others. In the company I'm in, I've had many bosses. Depending on who you report to, the approachability factor is huge. I'm actually in a position right now where I'm very comfortable with my boss, but there are some things that I still am hesitant about because, well, one, because my boss is male, and that's a big factor. So my question to you is, what would your advice be to women who have a boss that they're really not comfortable approaching? How would you handle that?
So I'm actually glad you asked that question. This was something I was hoping I'd be able to say today. I've had the pleasure of working for a lot of very strong and very supportive women. And probably one of the best experiences I've had in a similar situation is it was time for my promotion, and I knew it, and I knew she knew it, and I was expecting it, and she gave me my review. And as she finished, she said, and so a lot of times young women don't always ask for promotions when they deserve them. And she just waited for me. And so I said, okay, I think I deserve a promotion. I made my case and she said, great, I will grant it. But it was wonderful to actually have that encouragement and that opening to, she acknowledged it's tough for you to ask sometimes, but I want you to feel like you can. And, then I got the promotion and I looked at the pay raise and I said, I would now like a raise. And she said, okay, great. So I guess I have to give you that too. But, and it's that just kind of like having that, I think to management, I would say having that similar kind of conversation, even just coaching once, I think makes a big difference.
I think just to add to that, individual circumstances are very difficult. There are personalities involved. But what I would encourage is for all of you to take back to your organisations the notion of this EDGE certification, which is global, which is well recognised, which demonstrates to the organisations the economic benefits of proper gender equity. It then makes the organisation look much more closely at these individual issues. And empowerment's difficult on a one-to-one basis. It's much easier when it's collective.
Hi, Anne-Marie Green from Wiley. I was curious about your take on unconscious bias against mothers in particular. And I'll give you a recent example. I had a friend who saw my LinkedIn profile recently, and she's about my age. She's staunch feminist. And on my profile, I had included under volunteering that I was a Girl Scout troop leader, and I think Girl Scouts of America is an amazing organization. And she told me to remove it because of unconscious bias against mothers and the idea that people would know that I was a parent and might not want to hire me. So I just wanted to get your take or thoughts on that. They might know this is current, but I think
I think I might be the only mother on the panel, so I will have an initial stab at that. But actually, it would be really interesting to know what others, and you as a dad, Rick, as well, what both of you does. So, I mean, I think that's a really tough question. I instinctively am like outraged by that and think, no, it's an amazing organisation. It's fantastic that you volunteer your time, and it's a leadership role that you take. Anne-Marie and I know each other, so I know she plays a leadership role in her daughter's Girl Scout troop. So a large part of me says, absolutely not, you should keep it on there. And I think actually that is what I think. But I understand your friend's concern about it because as I said before, I do think unconscious bias is a huge issue for all of us. And I think that could contribute to it. But I think, so maybe the way to tackle it is to have it on there, but to be explicit about what business benefits you're deriving from it in some way. So, leading this, managing the accounts, whatever, but something that goes beyond it just being a volunteer activity to demonstrate how it's benefiting you professionally as well as personally would be my suggestion.
I just wanted to add, I'm not a mother, but I do see a real lack of value in companies for all types of caregiving, not just children, but if you have a sick spouse or a sick parent, a lot of times I see that falls to the woman to manage that scenario. And I would really like to see companies place more value on that. I'm young, but I plan to be a mother, and one day my parents will be sick, and I want to feel like that environment is nurturing for me.
Carol had a comment. There was a comment in the back, and then Anne. Sylvia.
So this is an issue near and dear to my heart because I was a Girl Scout leader and I was also the service unit coordinator for my town, and I was the treasurer, and I did a lot of business stuff for Girl Scouts. And I do not have any of that on my resume. I actually have several versions of my resume. Some of it is on there, and it's written as if it's a business. Is exactly what you were just saying. As what were the goals? How much money did we raise in our fundraising? All the kinds of measurable things that you would put on your resume for any activity. But unless it's a not-for-profit, not in the scholarly publishing world, I take all that stuff off my resume. And I go even further, even though I have lots of friends at SSP or whatever, but on my Facebook page, I basically don't put any personal family-oriented stuff, to the group that's my business friends. And I think there is unconscious bias. I don't think it should be, but, there it is. So I don't think your friend was wrong, and it shouldn't be like that, but I don't think me handicapping myself or you handicapping yourself is going to fix it. I think there are other ways to fix it. And it's a wonderful organization.
Carol, send that back to Sylvia. And can I just add very quickly, this is actually an issue that cuts across gender lines.
Are you listening to us?
Yeah. I'm echoing a lot in my mind the comments that you guys are making. There are very significant parts, personally, and I don't want to hijack this, but service stuff that I do that takes up a significant amount of my time outside of work that is arguably relevant to the skills that I bring to my job that I would never consider putting on my CV because I know how it would be seen by others. Sylvia, please.
So I want to talk to the point about caregiving, other kinds of caregiving, as well as childcare. This morning, during the plenary, Todd Carpenter and I were talking on Twitter about this very thing and how when there's no support for men to be caregivers of their kids, of their parents, of their spouses, of whoever, it's bad for men, but it's also bad for women. It's bad for everyone because when there's no support, the whole burden falls on women, and then they have no support. They burn out. They're bad at their jobs. They're unhappy. They're depressed, and everybody else is affected. And so I think that's a really good argument for the importance of not seeing this as a women's issue, not seeing it like just really appreciating and all of those things are piled on if you're a woman of color, if you're a person of color, if you're a queer woman of color, if you're, it just gets, the intersectionality just piles on the pardon me, Alice, the shit. And
I think this will be a new SSP catchphrase. Pardon me, Alice. Yeah.
I had a swear jar, Laura, for a while at work because I felt like I had a serious potty mouth, and my staff recently said, you know what? You need to own that potty mouth. Get rid of the swear jar. Okay, I'm done talking now.
Okay. Anne, did you still want to comment?
I would just quickly comment on that I completely agree with you. And this goes again to this, yes, we have a moral imperative, but also thinking about the practical things that our organizations can do. We had this discussion, this panel at CSE, and this came up, and this idea of flexibility, whether it was for working parents or whether it was for taking care of an elderly parent or any number of situations that might crop up. And it was also this discussion of telecommuting and general flexibility. And again, this is not just something that our organizations should do because they think it's the right thing to do. They should do it because giving that sort of flexibility to employees engenders loyal employees, which again, creates a business case for a more successful, productive, revenue-generating company. So again, I think we just need to be very careful that yes, there's this idea of these are things that there is this moral right, but also reinforcing it with the economic value is just so important in getting this message more broadly heard.
Anne, and then we'll have one more comment from the back, and then I think we have to close.
Okay, I have two quick comments. The first comment back to the Girl Scouts is Allison and I had the exact same reaction at the exact same time. Do you really want to work for an organization that would hold that against you? Honestly, Sylvia, I'll hold my potty mouth way back because my first reaction was they can, you know what? Honestly, and maybe that, so one could argue, okay, well then maybe in Rick, some of the things that you're holding back from your profile or whatnot, you might feel as though they're going to limit your opportunities. But the reality is they're not going to limit your happiness, because you're going to find a place where you're going to work. And by keeping those on there, you are setting the standard whereby they're not regarded in the same fashion over the longer term. And so the other thing I just want to say about what you were saying is that I don't think organizations realize that by making certain things a women's issue, they're actually making it more of a women's issue. By giving the same rights to men, by allowing men to take the mantle in certain places and not looking down on men. Like, we're not talking about the bias against men who want to do more and who want to do some of these, quote, women's things. By allowing that to happen, it actually makes it, as Sylvia said, better for everybody. So I completely agree with her.
Would you bring the mic back? And this will be our last comment, and then we have to break.
I just wanted to, my name's Monica, I work for the JAMA Network. I just wanted to kind of comment on a sort of a different perspective of the advocacy discussion. And that is that this is an incredibly small industry. We all know each other. We all worked at similar organizations. I think one tack to take would be to have sort of a practical sharing about how your organizations handle some of these issues in a way of sort of, you know, I've known Peggy when she worked at University of Chicago Press, and we've had people that go back and forth. I mean, this could potentially be a way to recruit the best of society scholarly publishers. So if I hear that, for example, University of Chicago Press has childcare that they offer, I remember this because I have children now, and I don't have childcare at my organization. That's the kind of thing that can be a way to raise up the industry, not necessarily in a political way, but in a, hey, you should go work for such and such. They really offer these kind of core benefits. And for an organization to remain competitive in this industry, they would also have to offer those benefits.
Great. This has been an amazing program. Can you please join me in thanking our panel for their contributions?